Okay, so here is some photos. We can kind of go through here and look at some different photos and see what maybe we want to edit using Lightroom. And so Lightroom is kind of a basic utility where Photoshop is going to be a little more, I guess, next level. And so it's good to start with Lightroom. And so this image needs a little bit of Photoshop because the individual needs brightening, but we could use Lightroom to get it going if we wanted it to. And so you can see the images I have here, a lot of them are taken in a very specific type of light. This image right here is a bit distracting. Sorry, I'm staying at somebody's house, so the dogs are... Hey, enough. Shh. Hey, you said that. Hey, come here, buddy. Come here, Toby. You can see that line of blue is a little distracting. And so when I saw this, I actually got a little bit lower, and then I got the blue out of there by going lower. Sorry about that. So you can see that I just went lower with that, and then that took the blue out. This is an example of using some interesting watery droplets in the background. This is backlight. That image would probably edit up nice. But let's start with something kind of basic here that I can work you through. So this is kind of a final edit. We can work on something raw right here. That looks pretty good. Let's try that. Okay, so let's reset all values out. Let's think about composition first. We don't want the bird to be in the center of the frame, obviously. And so what we're going to want to do is that we're going to want to edit in a way that will make the image a little bit more interesting. I do like that kind of glowing ball in the background. Some people would probably take it out. I'm not going to take it out, especially with this tutorial we're working on right now. I like that. The image is a little bit dark overall, so the camera sometimes adds contrast and adds things to it. And so you got to kind of pull it out. Pull up the shadows a bit, and then I'm making sure that I'm not blowing my highlights when I'm doing my edits, and so you can see that the highlights and all the values are still on play and all the feathers are still sharp. So if I did lose some of those values, I did lose some of those highlights, what I could do is I could bring this down, and you see how that brings the detail into the feathers way too much. So if you do blow your highlights, you can use that to bring your highlights back. I tend to only do it when I have that issue. There's a lot of stuff going on here. That white or this lighter blue here is a little bit distracting to me. And so I would take a gradient bar and pull it up. And then just drop the exposure a little bit on it to just kind of match that value a little bit. My attention is kind of being pulled up here a little bit. It's being pulled away from the bird a little bit. And so I'm going to start kind of working my way into it. When I pull up the shadows, I always drop the blacks a little bit to bring that richness back into the image. Contrast is kind of my last. I'll do contrast sometimes. Exposure, sometimes I do mess with exposure and kind of bring it up to kind of bring this kind of softer quality to things. But if I bring my exposure up, I always drop my highlights by a couple values. Check my sat, looks like the little yellow and the green right here. Got it +2. That's too much. I try to be really gentle on the sat. And then the white balance is really nice with this image. There might be a little bit of pinks in these areas, and so I can try to go more towards the green values, but you see that makes the image totally green. And so you don't want to do that too much. And that's back to balance. Go up to 19, to pink. I think the camera nailed it on that. Then you can look, you can bring up yellows, yucky. And you can see where you slide it, it'll zero out right there because it's in a lighter color right here. Where once I go up, then you see it go up. I think the camera kind of nailed it there. And so I'm going to go ahead and just leave it at that. So I've showed you this kind of gradient bar here that you can use to darken or certain particular parts of the image. This is like the classic L. You darken this and this, and you create an L of darkened area, which brings all your attention here. You can also achieve that in a different way, which would be using a circular filter. And kind of curving that in there. And then going down here and inverting it. And then just dropping the exposure on the whole image, and you'll see that it creates kind of like this interesting light beam effect. Ooh, sorry. You want to not invert it. And now you see that it's pulling the attention to this part. It's really easy to overdo this and to be like, oh yeah, look at this, oh my god, oh. But you don't want to do that. You want to just be really gentle with it because it can look cheap real fast. And you'll look at some of my images I've overdone it and they look kind of cheap. So that's kind of how I would go about working with Lightroom. There's a lot of like little stuff to make my image. Another example, here we have something that's not too difficult. Let's see here. So reset. You can see that this image has a hazy kind of quality to it, and that's because I shot really low through some grasses. And so it's kind of added a little bit of haze to the bottom. And so to pull some of that haze back out of it, you can go down here to the dehaze selector, and you can also add a little contrast in it, and it'll pull some of that out. You could also use a bar, a gradient bar here, come up from the bottom, drop the exposure a little bit, do a little dehaze. So with this image, I really like the way the image looks. I think the camera did a good job. I did a good job here. So I'll probably bring up the shadows, drop the darks, bring in a little bit of sat. Nice. And I want the attention to drop from the sky on this one. And so I pull a gradient like this, and I pull a gradient like this. And so you can see just a couple little things here. So if I just reset the whole thing, that was the original image. And this is what we're working with now. Other things you can do is you can actually go into the eyeball. This is not a good example of an image that I would do that with. I've done it with this particular bird right here. And you can actually just select the eyeball. And sometimes I add contrast and I will brighten that eyeball to give you a more dramatic effect. And that can be kind of fun to do sometimes. You can do it with nearly any bird. And look at this ibis right here. You can see that that eyeball is a little bit out of focus. And so you can actually bring this eyeball back into focus. Through adding contrast, clarity, dehaze, and then jack that exposure. A bit of blacks. And now I've kind of given that eyeball a sharper quality than it had, and it really pops. And so in this image, I'd say that because it was harsh light, I kind of overexposed the whole image. So I would want to, or I underexposed it. I think I purposely underexposed it because the image itself was going to be in harsh light. And so I'm going to bring that light back, drop the highlights down to bring that quality back. And then use one of these kind of funky little filters, bring it out a little bit more. Add another gradient, drop the exposure. And you can do really funky things. Some people do stuff like drop crazy sunbeams and shit. See that yellow that I just put in there? I don't particularly like that, but some people on Instagram you'll see do that quite a lot. It's called a light leak. Again, just trying to make this image as dramatic as possible. And this is just kind of my standard Lightroom protocol. I do a lot more with Photoshop. But yeah, you get the idea. What else do we have here? Let's see. We got a Shrike. So it's hard actually with this one because the Shrike doesn't actually, I like that there's this line up here and there's 3 layers of color, but the Shrike itself doesn't really, it kind of fades into the background a little bit. And I don't really like it's on the barbed wire, but that's besides the point. And so we got to try to find a way to bring that Shrike out. There's a little bit of green in this here, and so I would actually go ahead and pull the green out of it by bringing the pinks up a little bit. And that's a little bit more to my liking. And then come into the face, and you can see there's the eyeball. So you can use the same technique. Come in here, lighten the eyeball. Sorry, I got to invert it. And so that went too far. And so you can use just shadows. And then you can take another one of these guys. You can actually make a pupil. And so when you come out, that bird has a nice eyeball. And a lot of people use that technique. It's a pretty basic technique. I like that that 1 foot is up. Saturation for sure on this image. Might take the Shrike here and just kind of give it a little bit of brightness there. And I can teach you how to do that in Photoshop a lot more effectively. This is a very basic technique to try to bring that Shrike out. Again, we can use one of these kind of circular filters. These are kind of the bread and butter of Instagram or of Lightroom. We can bring some more dramatic stuff in here. And I don't really want to take those because I really like those blues actually, but I can't really show you how to do the rest of the stuff now because it requires Photoshop, and I can actually make more canvas and replicate all this area here that I really want to replicate. Bring the contrast in. Ooh, look at that. Oh boy. That's crazy. Maybe bring some highlights out. Maybe you can haze just a little bit. That's kind of interesting, you know what I mean? And so that's just kind of the protocol. And you can do that with every single one of the images. So that's how you do it. And yeah, I'll do another tutorial later.